go at, because this is the first time we've done this. So any comments will be gratefully received. Just be kind. Good. So let's just open in a word of prayer, shall we? Lord, we thank you we're able to meet together tonight. Thank you we can be talking all about you. And we just thank you that we have a faith which is strong, a faith which is certain. And Lord, I pray that tonight we'll just learn how certain that is, and also how we can defend our faith both to others but also to ourselves, that we can answer to ourselves questions that we might have. So, Lord, I ask you to be with us tonight, and you be glorified in all that we do and all that we think. So we commit tonight to now in Jesus' name. Amen. Good. So, let's just whiz through where we're up to. So that's where we've been. So tonight, just buried at the bottom, why is there suffering? That little throwaway question, which I've kept till tonight because in some ways it would have fitted in the first one, because often a very common objection is, I don't believe in God because of all the suffering. But it seemed to me more important to get the grounding done. But we have to kind of not exactly think differently, but it's a different part of us, and it can be a bit deeper in us, the issue of suffering. So it just felt the right thing to spend a whole session on it. So apologetics, of all the subjects, it's most important we think about this one. In your hearts, honour Christ the Lord as holy. Always being prepared to make a defence, that's the apologia, defence to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. And the gentleness and respect is quite important in this area, as we'll see. So these are the kind of questions, but the question about why is there evil, why is there suffering, can come in lots of forms. It might be very obvious of how come there's so much evil and suffering. A classic one which we'll look at, God is either all good or he's all powerful, but he can't be both, therefore we write him off. Why doesn't God simply get rid of evil? But it also can come out in things like, why is this happening to me? And it become quite personal. So lots of different ways this particular question comes at us. So evil is just something that affects everybody. There's nobody in the whole world who is exempt. At the very least, we're all going to die, and a lot of people have already. Death is just a feature of the world, and it's never seen as a good thing. There's natural disasters that happen. There's cruelty. So what I mean by that is man-made, either man-made disasters or man-made cruelty, one to another. There's a huge amount of that. And it all causes suffering, and we can see it is bad. There's illnesses, we're well aware of illnesses, and so on and so on. Everybody, at some point in their lives, will go through some hard times, and for some people, seem to go through lots of hard times. But everybody will know what's evil and what suffering is about. And I think when we talk to people about this, one of the things we have to be aware of is everybody comes, I've called it with a backstory, meaning whenever someone talks to us, and they particularly if they're asking this question, there'll be a reason for the question. And that reason can simply be, I'm really interested in why is this, and I just need to understand better. But more often than not, it's because there's some pain, and that's the backstory. There's a pain, there's a history, there's a story, there's something I need to understand, something I've been struggling with, and it's hurting, and I need to try and get a grip of why that is. And very often the last thing that's very helpful is to leap in with the big exposition of the reason for evil at a kind of academic level. Now, it helps to have that, but it's often not the most appropriate thing. And if you like, if someone is really suffering, the best apologetic is probably a hug, because words are sometimes too much. And if someone is just at the end of something, just to be there, put your arm around and just say, yeah, I'm here, but don't say very much, because just being with somebody is as important as coming out with, well, it's all to do with this, that, and the other. So I think we need to understand that. So asking questions is a great thing, so what's going on, what's behind, how you're doing, and just to try and understand so we don't leap into things. One of the things I had I seemed to have a spate quite a while ago, and I don't know if it happens like this, but Jehovah's Witnesses will come round and they talk. And if you ask a question, you realise you were kind of triggering. It was like popping, I'm going to say cassette into a cassette machine, for those who, a CD, or I'm streaming something. But you're just getting a kind of stock answer without any thought, that there's no engagement. It was just, you ask a question, so what do you think? And you get the stock answer. And it was quite hard to dig behind that and get to the person speaking. And we have to avoid being like that. We have to be genuine, doing it with gentleness and respect. That's how we need to be. So it's always, as a general principle, it's good to always ask questions before leaping in with an answer, but especially with this area. So there are answers, and we need to understand the big picture. We need to understand, if you like, the theology of why there is suffering. But that it's better to take place when we're not in the middle of suffering, if that makes sense. So I'm conscious that I don't know everybody's background here. So if you're going through a really difficult time, this is not to try and explain it away or anything. By all means, come and chat afterwards and so on. But it's just to say what we need to do now is to go into say, so what is the where does evil come from, and all those sort of things. But that's not necessarily going to address a particular season of suffering that's going on. Is that making sense? Yeah. Okay, so what I think we need to start with is what I've got a framework. So this is the Christian, the Bible story of where we are and why we are. So there's two key parts. That was creation. So in the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth, and we can read about that in Genesis 1. And he ended up with making men and women, and his description of it was very good. This was very good. So the original creation was, and this is God declaring, so God who is good knows this was very good. And he made men and women, human beings, he gave them the ability to make choices. And they were sort of moral choices. So human beings are made in the image of God. So we had, with the highest point of creation, if you like, certainly than the trees and the flowers and the animals, but the human beings were able to communicate with God. But we also had this ability to make a choice. And some people call it what's called a contrary choice. So we were able to do something which actually even God doesn't do, which is that we were able to choose against our own nature. So God said, you can eat everything in the garden, but just don't do that. That's the one command. Just don't eat that tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the ability to make that choice was, if you like, against Adam and Eve's nature, because their nature was to be made in the image of God. So that was a unique ability, if you like, that they had, not to make them special, but in order to see if you make the right choice, then you grow in that relationship with God, you become much more like him because you become moral beings. Being in the garden in the first place was a place of innocence. If it wasn't perfection, but it was innocence. And so this choice was made available to them. So it was possible to choose against God's will or to choose for God's will. That was the choice in front of them. And they chose, as we know, they chose to disobey. And that event is called the fall. So we often refer to it as the fall of man. But the fall, it's more than man, it's the fall in creation. So the image of God in us became a sinful nature. It was no longer fully the nature of God. The nature of God didn't disappear completely. We still have the image of God in us, in every one of us. But the pure image of God was marred and it became a sinful nature. And that nature was passed on to all of Adam's offspring, which includes us. So it polluted, if you like, the whole human race. And the other thing it did, it wasn't just human beings, it actually polluted, it corrupted, if you like, the whole of creation. So when Adam and Eve had to appear before God, one of the things God said to Adam was, "Cursed is the ground because of you." And instead of can you imagine, you just plant something and it grows? Well, now you're going to get thorns and thistles. And we know all about that. By the sweat of your brow, you will do work. Whereas prior to the fall, there was work to do, but it was pleasurable work and it wasn't sweat of the brow kind of work. Whereas now there's still work, but it's going to be hard, and there's going to be battles, there's going to be thorns and thistles, and all that might imply down through the ages. So Paul in Romans talks about the creation being subjected to a curse. So the whole creation is suffering as a result of the fall. And so this sinful nature means we're now unable to choose rightly. So in the first place, we could choose right and we could choose wrong. We could choose to follow God's will and we can choose to disobey it. Having disobeyed it, it now becomes not possible to choose God's will. And so we kind of set up that sinful nature, set us all, if you like, in opposition to God. And so Jesus said, you know, you've become slaves to sin. So we're in slavery, in bondage to sin and to that sinful nature. And if you like, that is why there's evil in the world. That's the root cause of evil in the world. And that's a kind of simplistic overview, but we need to have that, and we'll come back to this, but we need to have, that's why it happened in the first place. That God didn't create a world as it is now. He created a world that was good, and the ability of men and women to choose has turned it into the world that we see today. So, there are two streams, if you like, of argument that people come up with about why. It's all really to do with, does God exist? But why evil and suffering play a part in it. So the first one is called the logical argument. Is there a song a bit like that? The logical argument. So it simply says this: that if God is all powerful, he could prevent evil, because he's supposedly all powerful. So if he's all powerful, he could prevent evil. If he's omniscient, he could stop evil before it even takes place, because God knows everything, so he knows what people are about to do, so he could stop it before it happened. If he's morally perfect, he would want to stop evil. Evil exists, therefore God, as described above, as described as all-powerful, omniscient, morally perfect, doesn't exist. You follow the argument, that plays sometimes in that level of detail. Sometimes it's, well, if God wanted to stop it, why doesn't he? But essentially that is this argument. And if that's the case, that's pretty much weakened the last 2 weeks worth of discussion that we've had, because it undermines it completely. So because all these proofs of God, yeah, but he can't be God because it's an either or. Either he's all powerful, he's all loving, but he can't be both. So he's not either. So he's not there. And it's sort of down to, so are God and evil compatible? Can you have God and evil? There's clearly evil, so the argument goes, so therefore you can't have God. So, does that sound hard to answer back? Well, there is a defence. So I've just summarised the defence, but essentially, if we go through it in step by step. So God is all-knowing, and he's all-powerful, and he's all-loving, and he created men and women, mankind, as moral agents, able to make that choice, as we've said. So they could choose evil as well as good. Now, because God is all-knowing, he knew that evil would result. So Adam and Eve's choices didn't catch God by surprise. He knew that would happen. Now, because he's all-powerful, he could have created the world in any kind of way that he wanted, but he's chosen to create it this way. So the world that we live in, with the first men and women making that moral choice, and he knew that the choice would go the wrong way, but he knew that, yet he chose to create the world this way. So as a result, we would say God created the potential for evil, but human beings made it actual. So God didn't create evil, but he created the potential, because in order to make a good choice, you've got to see it against a bad choice, otherwise it's no choice at all. So there's evil in the world because God has a good reason for doing it, for putting it there. Now, we don't have to know what that reason is, but just from an argument point of view, from a piece of logic, then that is reasonable, that God has made the world this way because he's got a good reason for doing it that way, for allowing evil in the world. So you see things like that in so the story, I think it was referenced the other day, the story of Joseph, the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat Joseph. At the end of all his suffering, when he was restored with his brothers, he said to them, you meant it for evil. You wanted to kill me, but you sold me to slavery, and all the things I had to suffer, that you meant it, you intended it for evil, but God meant it, intended it for good. So God didn't just allow it to happen and made it the best out of a bad thing. He meant it, he intended that to happen. So God can intend things and allow people to do what they're morally responsible for, but for good purposes. So God has an overarching good purpose. Romans 8:28, we know that in all things God works together for good for those who love him. He can work all things for good. That was written by Paul. Paul suffered a lot, and yet he could say, actually all things work together for good for those that love him, because God has a purpose, and that purpose we may not see in its outworking, but we know the end result. We know that he's good, and we know because God is good, then that is a good purpose. But along the way, things are not as we would want them, and there is evil along the way. But it is not inconsistent to have evil and a good God. That is the point. And the logical argument, if you like, is if anyone follows or studies or looks at logic, there's lots of logical fallacies, and this is called the either-or fallacy. So you're presented with an either-or, so it's this or it's that, as though those are the only two choices. Either God's good or God's powerful, but he can't be both. And that is a fallacy, because those aren't the only choices or the only options. The other option is actually God is all of those things, but he's got a purpose in allowing evil, which is actually very good. And while we may not know the reasons and how, and really, but it's not illogical. There's no fallacy in that argument, which is kind of arguing up there. But does that make sense? I think it gets easier. So so we've got this logical argument. Then we've got what's called the evidential. Don't worry about the terms. But essentially this is saying, well, actually, there's too much evil in the world. In fact, we can see more evil going on in the world than we can see evidence for God. And very often, you Christians say, oh, well, yeah, all things work together for good, but we don't often see good. And you can look at situations where you say, well, what good could possibly come out of that? So if you're like, God, you've gone too far. There's just too much of this. So that scene, has anybody seen an interview that Stephen Fry did? Has anybody seen that? He was interviewed, and the interviewer said to him, if you could stand before God, what would you say to him? And he just let rip. He said, and his first things were, I would say, how dare you? And he started talking about cancer in children and so on, and how dare you? David Attenborough says similar things. No, there can't be a God. And he always cites the same thing, because there's this little worm that grows in children's eyes, makes them go blind. Fancy God creating a thing like that. That is awful. So there can't be a God. Charles Darwin gave up on Christianity following the death of his daughter. It caused him so much suffering, which in itself is understandable. But it caused him so much suffering. He said, surely God would not have allowed this. So really, there can't be a God that put me through such pain and suffering. So, interestingly, the end of that is not always, therefore God doesn't exist, but it seems more likely to us that God doesn't exist, which goes along the, I don't know if you remember a few years ago, the humanists put a thing on the London buses, there may not be a God, so stop worrying, something like, but there isn't a God, there may not be a God, which is interesting. They didn't dare or couldn't bring themselves to say there isn't a God, but say, well, there may not be a God, so don't worry. So how do we answer that? Well, there's a few ways we can respond to that. One is, well, that argument is based on arrogance. God, how dare you? How dare you do something that I don't think you should do? Is sitting in a position of judgment over God. God, there's a moral standard which I have, but you're not keeping it. So the question will be, well, where do we get that moral standard from? We spoke about that over the past couple of weeks. Where do we get our morality from as what is right and wrong? And if God is doing something, can we say to him, well, what you're doing, God, is not right? So that puts us in a position of judgment over God. And where do we get that from? So it becomes a little bit selfish, because generally that's to do with how come you've done something which upsets me. Either you've caused me pain personally, or you're doing things I really don't like going on, like the worm in the eye or children with cancer. What is also interesting in Stephen Fry's response, Stephen Fry is an atheist, and he was asked, what would you do if you were in front of God and could talk to him? He didn't say what I would have thought an atheist would have said is, well, there's no such thing, there is no God, so there's nothing to say. He actually said, I acknowledge the existence of God, and this is what I'd say to him. So that in itself is interesting. And then the big thing with these arguments is the fall. So we talked about the creation and the fall. The fall is completely ignored. So it doesn't come into anyone's thinking. So it's very often, or most of the time, people will say, well, God's created the world, and what we see now is how God created the world. So why would he create a world which allows cancer in children? Because you can't acknowledge the fall of man, because that's a story in the Bible, which I really don't want to accept, thank you very much. So we'll ignore that bit, and we'll look at, well, what we see now is how it's always been. So the assumption is God has made the world in the way that it is. So that makes God, if you like, morally responsible for the evil that is in the world. The arguments are loaded. So what I mean by that is we have spent a couple of weeks, and particularly in the first week, looking at what are quite strong arguments for the existence of God. That they're very difficult to refute. They're not mathematical proof, but that would not be possible. You can only have mathematical proof in maths. But they're nevertheless very solid arguments about why does God exist. And then to say, oh, well, this over here is kind of ignoring that. It's like a seesaw and taking one half off altogether and saying, look, it's all about suffering. Whereas actually there's strong arguments, very strong arguments for the existence of God. And the right approach is to say, how do we reconcile the things about the evil and the suffering in the world with what is strong arguments for the existence of God? So they cannot be ignored, and yet often they are. So it kind of tilts or loads the argument. We've got, so if you remember, we spoke about the cosmological, teleological, and axiological. You remember those words? So God exists because God has to exist for anything to be. So creation requires a first cause. It requires somebody to be there. God has to be there. The purpose, the moral arguments, and the design arguments are, again, very strong arguments. The Bible is a strong argument for the existence of God because it's trustworthy. It talks about Jesus, and it talks about Jesus rising from the dead and doing miracles and speaking very strongly about the existence of God. It describes prophecies and miracles which are impossible to explain in any kind of natural way. Jesus' resurrection is just something that has to be a work of God. So all those things are weighted on one side, and then to say, well, we have to ignore all of those, which means you really have to come up with a load of other explanations for them, which we've seen is really very difficult, if not impossible. And then so it's all down to this one side, all to do with suffering. So that's possibly a little bit academic in some ways, but it gives a bit of groundwork, I think, in to say, actually, there are explanations for why evil is in the world. There are explanations as to why things go wrong. And at the end, we don't like the fact there is evil in the world, and we wish there wasn't, and we wish God would take it away. But the fact that he doesn't is because, well, God knows what he's doing. A God who can create the universe at a breath knows what he's doing. So we have to just take a little bit of humility and say, well, maybe he does. And maybe God has things which I don't understand. And because I don't understand them doesn't mean to say they don't exist or they're wrong. It just means I'm finite and God is not. So it's a little bit of humility. So another approach is to look at, so what do we actually mean by evil? So evil is described very often in terms of things like what ought not to happen. This ought not to be. There ought not to be cancer in children. There ought not to be worms that eat kids' eyes. There ought not to be fighting and war. There ought not to be death. Those are things which we see as evil and suffering and all those other things. But very often it's because they shouldn't be there. But in order to say that, you have to say, but there has to be something good that evil isn't. So you can't define evil without saying, but there's something good. We have a concept of what is good. What is good is that men and women get along and don't fight one another. What is good is that there's no disease in the world. What is good is that nature doesn't go wrong. There's no natural disasters. Those are good things. Evil is saying good has been watered, something has been taken away from what is good. But we need the good to be able to understand what is not good, what is evil. And if you simply say, well, I don't believe in God because there's so much suffering, well, okay, take God away, now what are you left with? Well, the suffering doesn't go away, but you've now got to say, why are we bothered by all those things? Why are we bothered by the fact that people die? Why are we bothered by the fact that people get ill? If there is no God and if there is no good behind it, it's not actually evil. It's just kind of, that's how it is. So taking God away doesn't solve the problem. If anything, it makes it worse. Because you can't call anything bad with any kind of meaning behind the word bad or evil, because you have no reference point. There's nothing there. So it's just that's how it is. So good and bad becomes a preference, not a this is really good or this is really bad. It's just, well, I prefer that or I prefer the other, but you might prefer some different things. So the problem of evil is not a Christian problem. It's actually a very real problem for people who are not believers. It's a very real problem because evil's still there, but you can't call it evil. So what do you call it? And if you say that's how it is, you become very, very cold. Take the kids die. Well, that's how it is. That's a cold and inhuman, and we recognise that as a wrong attitude. But if you haven't got God and good in place, then it's just a preference. And so we almost dehumanise ourselves. So it's a very real problem for people who are not believers, a massive problem. And in fact, so much so, the presence of evil, I think I referenced this last week, the presence of evil is actually a very powerful proof of God. And just think about that. But the presence of evil in the world is a very powerful proof of God. Because if God was not there, it's not evil. It's just how it is. and good and evil are just relative preferences. They're not real. So the fact that we are disturbed by things that are wrong is a very real evidence for God's existence. So, given all that, why doesn't God just get rid of it? Why doesn't God get rid of evil? Just say, that's it, had enough, wipe it out. Well, one of the reasons would be if God is morally pure and we know that we have taken a wrong course, we have inherited from Adam all the way down the ages, we've inherited a sinful nature. If God said, right, at 9 o'clock tonight, I'm going to wipe all evil out of the earth, which of us would say, yeah, I'll be here at 1 minute past 9? We'd all have to be taken out with it, because not one of us can say, no, I've never ever done wrong. I'm absolutely pure. So he would actually just wipe everything out, and he'd kind of destroy what he set up. So if we've also said, well, actually had a good reason for setting the universe up as it is, he's completely going against it, probably doing a bad thing, because what he's done overall is a good thing. That makes sense. So the guy called Norman Geisler, who's written quite 2 or 3 books on apologetics, but he says to overcome evil, we need to talk about defeating it, not destroying it. So defeat evil. But if we destroy evil, well, we go down with it. Everything kind of lost. But if we defeat evil, we've overcome it, and if you like, we can move on. So the fall, the doctrine, if you like, the theology of the fall, creation and the fall, the fact that there's a fall from something good is something that gives us hope. There's real hope in the fact that we've fallen, because there's the possibility of restoration back to that really good place. If that wasn't there, if this is the result of whatever, loads of time, and here we are, well, what hope have we got? We had a sermon on that, didn't we? What hope have we got? Well, actually, we can maybe get a little bit better. But with the fact that we fell from something means there's the possibility that we can get back to that something. So when God says, yes, I'm going to restore all things, I'm going to make a new heaven and a new earth, that's a very real hope that we have. It's not just things getting better, it's things restored. Evil gets defeated. And ultimately that will mean it's gone, so it is destroyed, but not by going at evil, but by defeating it, by overcoming it. And the solution, well, here's the solution. What is the solution to evil? How is it defeated? It's in Jesus. So years and years ago, when we started doing door knocking and speaking to people and evangelism, one of the things we got told was, you might get a load of questions, but always try and get back to Jesus, because Jesus is what it's all about. Jesus is where the gospel is. And people do have questions. We've looked at some of those questions, but ultimately get back to Jesus. And here's one of the reasons why, because Jesus is the solution to evil. So how can you believe in God with so much evil and so on? Well, look at Jesus. Jesus suffered the worst kind of evil. He suffered an unfair trial. He suffered a brutal death. He suffered what we didn't see as such, but he suffered separation from God. It was agony upon agony. He suffered. And he took that in our place. He had no need for that. He was not guilty of anything. He didn't deserve to take that punishment, but he did so on our behalf. So Jesus, as well as taking punishment, he will also judge sinners. So at the end of the day, every sin is going to be dealt with. It'll either be dealt with by Jesus on the cross, or it will be dealt with by Jesus judging it. But no one's ever getting away with anything. And while that might sound a bit brutal, that's what Jesus is. He's Lord of all. He will be judge of all. Paul says, doesn't he? He set a time when Jesus will judge everybody. Therefore, he calls everybody to repent, everybody to turn around and accept what Jesus has done. Jesus will be the instigator of a new creation. And we kind of know that a little bit because in his resurrection body, it was different. It wasn't a resuscitated body. It was different. His body could do things that our bodies can't. So he could walk through doors, he could appear and disappear. It's like it is called a glorified body, and it gets even better when John saw Jesus at the opening book in the book of Revelation. Jesus, he was kind of spectacular. He was glowing, and the disciples got a glimpse of that in the Transfiguration. This is what it's going to be like, but this is what it really will be. We can't imagine it. It's just going to be so much better than it is now. But it's a new creation. I will make all things new. So there'll be a link with the past. We'll still be us. We'll still be human. We'll still have bodies, but they won't go wrong. And some of us say, oh, amen. Things won't go wrong. We won't grow old. We won't get weak, and we won't die, because it will be new. All things will be made new. And we just have that terrific hope. So it's not just us, it is a new creation. So the world will be renewed. And we again, you see pictures that the lion will lie down with the lamb. There'll be no more nature killing of each other. There'll be no more floods, earthquakes. There'll be no more diseases. COVID will be a distant memory, if we even can be bothered to remember. That sort of stuff will not happen. I remember a while ago having a bit of a problem with some of this. So God put men and women into this perfect garden and said, right, this is it's absolutely brilliant. Yes, it is. It's very good. Just don't eat that tree. And they did. So then we have the whole story of salvation, at the end of which we're put into to heaven, into a new creation. So in my mind I thought, so what's to stop that happening all over again? Could we sort of say, yes, it's great, but well, there's just that one thing you said, and could it all happen again? And the answer to that is, I think, no, it won't. And the reason it won't is because Jesus has taken us into, if you like, a next step. So in Eden, men and women were able to sin, but they were also able not to sin. They would have had the ability not to sin. That was the choice. But now we don't have that ability. We're not able not to sin. Too many negatives there. But we are able to sin, but we can't not sin. We can't make the right choice because we've inherited the sinful nature. But in the future, that will be taken away. So we will be not able to sin. So we'll be able not to sin and not able to sin. I feel a chart coming on to get that. But we will not be able to. The idea of making a wrong choice has been overcome. Jesus overcame that all through his life, through his temptations, which are very similar to the temptations that Eve and Adam subsequently faced. His work, his life of perfect obedience, his death on the cross to pay that price for those who did disobey. This is a consequence. And his resurrection into a new life says we pick up that new life. We're in that resurrected life. So the ability to sin won't be there. I thought, that's good, because the idea of having to go through, it would just be never ending. But no, it does end. It comes to an end. So I finished each of the sessions with certainty. So these are the things we can be certain of. So evil and suffering are not a part of the original creation. They were made possible, but it was human beings that made them actual. God is not surprised by evil and suffering. He knew what was going to happen. And by inference, it means he knows everything about whatever we're going through. He is not surprised by things that go wrong in our lives. We're surprised by them. And we say, oh no, not again. And not another one. But God is not surprised by them. Just on a personal note, I might say that is massively, massively helpful. In our family, in the past 12 months, we have gone through what you might call body blows, things that have happened, which I can't talk about because it's not directly to me, but things have happened which have really hit hard and really hit deep. And then it goes on, and then something else happens. You think, oh, have we not had enough? And then as probably you're aware, just after Christmas, my wife slipped on a stair, broke her knee. And that's just taken, she's still in the process of recovery. And you say, oh, not another thing. But God is not surprised by that. We can't say to God, what is going on? And he said, oh, sorry, I didn't see that one coming. Of course he did. And he knows all about this. I can't stand here and say, oh yeah, everything has got resolved and here's the good that's come out of it. But I know good will come out of it. When and how, I don't know, but I know someone who does know. And when you... This is part of what I meant by we need this framework and, if you like, this theology, this theory, to be able to say when things are tough, I can fall back on that and say, actually, no, God does know about all these things. He knows what's going on, and he's with us in it. He's been through way, way worse things than we will ever go through. He's been through it. He's with us, and he's a saviour. He's preparing a place for us. In Christ, there is a solution to evil and suffering. He's dealt with it. He's defeating it. Death is defeated because Jesus came back from the dead. That's it. Death is, you've had it. So we still die, but it's not death the awful thing, it's death the gateway. Like Paul said, for me to live is Christ, to die is gain. What shall I choose? Shall I stay here and minister to the church, or shall I die and go and be with him? So death is the gateway to being in the presence of God. Meanwhile, he's preparing a place for us. I had this thought a long time ago as a young Christian, so it's not theologically really correct, but God made the world that we see today in 7 days. That is fantastic. Jesus has so far spent 2,000 years preparing what he's coming for us. Well, how much better is that going to be? It's probably not theologically correct, but I was encouraged at the time. But he's preparing a place for us. He's preparing that place. He's preparing us for that place, and that place for us, where we will be fully human once again, and it will be free from evil and suffering. And these things we can be certain of. So they're not just wishful thinking. This is our hope, but hope meaning something that is real, that is coming, and by faith we just believe this is true because it is, and so we can be certain of these things. It's a revelation. I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eye, and death shall be no more. Neither shall be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away. And he who is seated on the throne said, behold, I'm making all things new. And he also said, write this down, because these words are trustworthy and true. We can be certain of them. So I want to do a couple of things now. So we have a little discussion. So I've got a couple of questions. So if we can just do a little thing of getting into groups of 3 or 4 or 5, whatever, and just sort of say, so how do you respond when there's evil and there's suffering, either personally or we see it globally or where we see it elsewhere? Have you ever had to face questions? Have anybody ever asked you questions about how can you believe with all this stuff going on? Or have you ever asked that yourself? Have you thought, this is hard? And again, our personal experience says when something happens that's really hard, you think, this isn't theory. I know the theory, but now this is real. And you have to say, do I really believe this? So have you ever had to face things like that? So if we could spend, let's say about 20 minutes again, so just after past, and I'll get us back together again. I've just one other little thing to do, but is that okay?